Here's a walkthrough for what you need to do for the assignment for this week. I have downloaded the files from Digital Audio Assignment, and I'm going to bring them in here. I'm going to take the one called Silence and drop it up there. And you don't see a waveform because it is actually silence. I will take the one called Counting and put it here as well. You see a little waveform. And then the one called Berwyn Excerpt, I'm actually going to put on a different one because, as you'll see, this one is stereo. These, you only see one line, are mono. So what we're going to be doing is exporting these in various formats and then looking at the file size and what they sound like. So let me show you a little trick here before we get going. In Finder on your Mac, if you select the file, you can see when you're in this column view over here, it tells you that this is a stereo 96 kilohertz WAV file and that the file is 11.5 megabytes. This is in the column view, so sometimes your Finder might look like this. If you hit Command 1, it puts it in this view. If you hit Command 2, it puts it like that, which also tells you the size of the file. But if you hit Command 3, it gives you this 3-column view, which gives you some other information. So you can see that it's 24 bits per sample, 96 kilohertz. If I look at counting, it's mono 2496, etc. The one that's silence, again, same thing. And I'm going to ask you to come back and look at some of this information after we do these things. So what you need to do is you need to export each of these things as the instructed file. So we have a 24-bit 48K stereo file, 1644.1 stereo wave, a mono wave, etc. And I want you to do each of them individually. So the way you can do this, if I select this file, you see at the top here, this little thing, that's the loop marker. If the loop marker does not automatically show up, let me just select an area. Well, it did, but if it doesn't, if you hit Shift P, that will create the loop marker for that area. But you select this, so this is the silence file. So while I have it selected, if I go Song, Export Mixdown, I can select Between Loop. Now, the first thing we exported, we did between start and end marker. Between loop is another option. And I'm going to call this silence. And then we need to do 24-bit 48 kilohertz. So it's a wave file, 24-bit. Let's change this to 48 kilohertz. Main. I do not have the mono box checked, so it will make a stereo file. I click OK. You didn't see that other window, but we now have a 24-bit 48 kilohertz stereo file that went into the Mixdown folder for my session. So if I come over here, I have the session here, Mixdown folder, silence, it's 5.7 megabytes. If I look at the original one, it is also 5.7 megabytes, but I used half the sample rate. I wonder why that is. Let's come back to the Mixdown just to see what this looks like. Let's bring this silence file in and drop it there. It is now a silent file of stereo instead of mono. So the point that we're making here is that even if the file is completely silent, it still uses every bit. So a silent file takes up the same amount of space as the others. So another example, let's make a mono wave file. So let's select the counting and again go to Song, Export Mixdown. Between loop, let's call this counting 16 44.1 we make it a 16-bit 44.1 kilohertz wave file. Fix where I can't type up there. Between loop, hit OK. It will take a moment to do that. And you'll see we have stereo 1644.1. If I wanted to redo that as the mono file, I could come back, song, export mixdown, leave those settings, check the box that says mono, click OK, and we get another WAV file. Now this WAV file says mono, is 2 megabytes, and this WAV file is 3.9. That 2 is actually rounded up. So this one's twice as big because it's stereo, right? So it's 2 channels instead of 1. So what you should do is go through and export everything in each of these formats. And then the last step, actually, let me do this one. Select this music file. This actually, so let's take this file, and I'm going to song export mixdown. I'm going to call this Berwyn 64 kbps. And I want to select the MP3 file. Leave 44.1 kilohertz is fine, but take the smallest one, 64 kbps. Click OK. It's going to make that. And when we look over here, we see that's a very small file, 161 kilobits. Just to see what that sounds like. This preview's not going back through. Well, what I'm going to ask you to do is take this and bring it back in. Now what it's going to do is it's going to convert that. Oh, I left it on mono, didn't I? That's why it's so small. That's not the one that I want. Let's delete this. Let's go back. Oops. Let's go back and make sure that we select the right thing. Command E is the same thing as song export. Let's uncheck mono. 64 kbps. There we go. It will take a moment to do that. Yeah. Stereo. Still says 161 kilobytes. That's weird. Okay. So let's bring this in. It will convert it back to a WAV file, but it should still sound like the 64 kilobit thing, which you will hear sounds different than. Hopefully that'll translate well on YouTube. And then what I want you to do is now export this back to a WAV file, and let's make it as big as possible. Oops, let's do 96. As big as possible. And you'll see we get this very large WAV file again. And what I'm going to ask you to do is go through and listen to each of these and see if this big one made from the small MP3 sounds like the WAV file that we started with. So you'll have written instructions about what to do and then questions to go through and answer on Canvas. But that's the basic process.